Okay, so the idea here is that I'm going to attempt to implement the customer relations manager, but I'm going to do it slightly differently in that instead of scaffolding a customer, I'm going to use a generator for just the model, and then I'm going to use ActiveAdmin. And it's not that scaffolding is somehow incompatible with ActiveAdmin, it's just that what ActiveAdmin provides for you is the same as and an improvement on what scaffolding generates for you. And so ActiveAdmin gives you the ability to do all of your CRUD tasks with the customer without having to have the scaffolding in place. So I'll start a new Rails project. So I'll say Rails new CRM demo. I'll make sure I can open up the folder that it's in. You can see multiple versions of this CRM from past invocations of this class. Let's see, CRM demo, here it is. Okay, so that creates my new Rails application, which is just this directory with all the sort of the standard Rails stuff in it to begin with, but it doesn't really do anything yet. I'm going to open a few other command prompt windows within this same folder. One will just be always running the Rails server. One will be running the Rails console. And the other one is going to be there for stuff like Rails generation commands, rake commands, and GitHub. And so I'm going to also create a new GitHub repository. And I've made a new GitHub organization. I was sort of filling up my personal GitHub account with all sorts of Red River repositories that I often end up just deleting. So I have a separate one now that's called StungEye RRC. And I can put the demo customer relations manager in there. Demo Rails CRM for CD2000. And I'll create that repo. And then from the command prompt here, I can run a git init to initialize this project as a project that's under git control. And then I can do a git add to stage all existing files, and then I'll do a commit, which will be my very first commit of the project. I can then link it to my GitHub remote and push it there as well. So again, this sort of stream of errors you likely won't see. They're not really errors, they're warnings. You likely won't see this. I should probably just fix that problem. At some point or another, when I set up Git, I specified to it that it should warn me if the line endings were not the line endings that I wished to see. And this is because Windows line endings are slightly different than Linux ones. And now it's giving me that warning for every file within the system. But they're just warnings. It just happily commits them still. It just warns me about each file. So I'll commit them all. First commit. And then I can go and link to this remote. And I'll do this here. Oh, I see what I did. Did you see what I did? I did everything. I was in my Rails project folder and I initialized it as a Git repository, and then I added like everything. Not the biggest deal. There's just now this .git in that folder, and I can just delete that folder, and my project is no longer under Git control. So what I forgot to do was to CD to the proper folder, which was my demo CRM. or the CRM demo. That's, I think, what I called it. What did I call it? CRM_demo. And now I'll do a git init, and now I'll do an add. Won't get as many errors or warnings, and now I can do my initial commit. And now I'll go about adding my remote and push from origin to master. And over here, we have the customer relations manager mirrored on GitHub. Okay, so again, all I needed to do to remove Git from the incorrect folder was every folder that's Git enabled has this hidden folder called .git, and I just deleted it, and away it went. Okay, so the point of the customer relation manager was that we had a customer with a customers table where we had a full name, phone number, email address, image, and a series of notes as a text field. So I can go and I can do a Rails generate model for that customer instead of a Rails generate scaffold. And then we're gonna have like a full name. And these days it's very unlikely that I have a full name column. I usually do split it up into first name, last name, although that's sort of Western centric thinking. I haven't fully figured out the best way to save names in a database yet. So sometimes I use full name, sometimes first and last, sometimes it's just a username. Phone number, email address. I'm not going to bother with the image. You've seen me set up images in past classes, so I'm going to just skip over that, and I'll just go right to the notes. So, and on your Rails project, you can do images one of two ways. You can do them like I did in the previous lecture, where I just set up a image file name column, and I put images directly in the app assets images folder. Or you could use a upload plugin like Carrier Wave to handle file uploads for you. Okay, so running my generator for a model creates not only a model in the app models folder, but also a migration, which I now have to run. So I run my rake db migrate to get my customers table. And now I want to add ActiveAdmin. So ActiveAdmin is a gem. I can see the project itself because it's an open source project. It's up on GitHub, and at the top of the docs in the open source project, it talks about the fact that they're working on version 1, which will support Rails 4, which is the version of Rails that we're using. But if you want to get Rails 4 working right now, it says you get support by tracking master. And what that means is ordinarily when you use a gem in a Rails project, the gem is fetched from rubygems.org. This is the repository of gems that are present in the Ruby ecosystem. And so if I look for ActiveAdmin, you'll see that the version of ActiveAdmin that's up on RubyGems is 0.6.3. We want to get as close to 1.0 because we need Rails 4 support. And so we need to tell Rails that instead of going to the rubygems.org website, it needs to use GitHub instead to go point to this GitHub repository and pull the latest master branch. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the project folder, and there's a gem file. This is where we specify the gems that are required by our project. There's a number of gems in there already, like the Rails gem and the SQLite 3 gem and the SAS gem. These are all stuff that Rails sort of asks for by default in the gem file. And so these are just comments. I'll just remove them for now. And I'll add a new line in there saying gem ActiveAdmin. Now, if I wanted just to pull it from rubygems.org, this is all I would put, although I might also specify a version. But instead, I want to add what they've told me to add, which is following gem ActiveAdmin from GitHub on the ActiveAdmin account. So now I can go to my command prompt. I've saved that gem file. I can run bundle install, and this is a program called Bundler, which looks at that gem file and it sees which of the gems I already have, which need to be installed, and it uses the gem program to manage the dependencies. So ActiveAdmin will itself depend on a number of other gems from the ecosystem, and it will pull those in as well. And once it does that, we can go to the gemfile.lock, and we can actually see the dependencies that were pulled in. We can see which other gems were pulled into our system because we are now using ActiveAdmin. Okay, the other thing I should do is I should look at the ActiveAdmin website and the documentation, because it tells me what to do once ActiveAdmin is installed. Oh, and the one thing it doesn't mention anywhere, which I just forgot, but can now, I'll have to run this bundle install another time. ActiveAdmin can provide for you user authentication, right? There's a login for ActiveAdmin, but they don't want to specify up front which login or authentication gem that you have to use in your system. So you can pick and choose. However, the one that it's sort of defaults to is a system called Devise. And so you actually have to add that as it's not a dependency, because they allow you to use other authentication gems. And so you actually have to go in and add the Devise gem below there. If you don't, when you go and run the ActiveAdmin install program, it'll tell you to do this. So it'll just say, we've noticed that Devise wasn't in your gem file. If you want to use Devise, add it now and run bundle install again. So it's not like it would just sort of silently fail. It would tell you what was going on there. So I'll save it and I'll run that again. And now if I go to that lock file, we can see these are all the other gems that ActiveAdmin depends upon. So when we pulled in ActiveAdmin, we've now pulled in this many other gems. Some of them were already there, like the Rails gem, for example. And hopefully Devise is in here somewhere as well. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah.
Just installs it for that one project.
Yes, like if you, in your system, those gems are now there, but each Rails project has its own gem file, which defines the gems that are to be used for that particular project. And the reason they do it that way is because you may have built one project that depends on a certain series of gems at a certain specific time, like versions of particular gems, and then you might go create a newer Rails application and use newer versions of those gems, but you don't want to then have your old app stop working. And so it manages the fact that your old app may depend on older versions of particular gems. Okay, so let's go see what we're supposed to do after installing ActiveAdmin. After you update your bundle, you have to run the installer, which is a Rails generate command. So we use Rails generate for things like generating scaffolds and for generating models and for generating controllers, but plugins like ActiveAdmin can also hook into the generate tool that Rails provides for you and provide gem-specific generators. So here we're going to run Rails generate ActiveAdmin install. So that's not one of the built-in generators. That's something that ActiveAdmin has specifically added to our project. one of the things it'll do now is it'll create some migrations for us that will be database tables that ActiveAdmin will use. One of them being the users, like the admin users table that will be used to store username and passwords for logging into ActiveAdmin. After this runs, we'll run rake-db migrate to actually get those tables instantiated. And then we have to register the models that we wish ActiveAdmin to be able to work with. And we have to register them in two ways. So here is ActiveAdmin creating some files and migrations for us. I have noticed that this is one of the few times that I have to restart the Rails server. Let's see if I can do that. Okay. So that's about ready to rerun. Oh, but don't rerun it just yet, Kyle, because the other thing's not done. There. So this is done. What it needs to do, rake-db migrate. We'll go and run this migration right here. Devise create admin users. Devise has also given me some information here about sort of certain things that it wants me to do in my code. None of which I actually have to worry about. Some of them are for production mode. Some of them are for if we're deploying to a website like Heroku. So we don't have to worry about what it mentions in that list of things there. And I can run my Rails server now over here as well. So once it goes sort of operational, once it's up and running, I should be able to go to my local host. This is the previous Rails project, so this is not what we're using, but localhost /admin, and that should take me to the ActiveAdmin section of the website. So I just have to wait for my server to boot up. And it looks like my migration has successfully run. So you can see it's created some tables for us. And the server is up and running. Apparently not. Could not find table admin users. Okay. I thought that's what we just ran. So when I ran that migration, it generated for me a table called ActiveAdmin comments. Why didn't this run? Whereas this one did. Let's go look at them. I've got a DB folder. I've got a migrate folder within there. It seems to have run this. Hey, that's really weird. It created this migration without the .rb on it, which didn't happen with the last section. When I did this demo with the other section, it didn't do that. That might actually be a bug in master. So one of the problems with tracking the master on GitHub is that's the project that's under development. And so because it's under active development, small bugs like this could crop up. So rake-db migrate will now solve that problem.
It didn't happen with mine.
It didn't happen with yours. Oh. Spooky. Not sure why that would have happened. But let's see if it's going to, it should now pick up that new migration, run it, and create the admin users table for us, at which point we should be able to go back in and not have this error. It's totally painful using my old computer for these screencasts though, because it is so incredibly slow compared to the other one. There we are. Deep breaths, Kyle. Deep breaths. Okay.
Why don't you just load your old one on Windows 7? Dual boot.
I guess I could do that. Yeah.
Be faster.
It probably would be. And lo and behold, we have a login screen. It ships with the default email and password, admin@example.com, and a password of password. Password. Have I typed it in incorrectly?
They want to check that migration to see what you put in it.
Okay, let's check it out. And it doesn't seem to have seeded it with anything. This is a job for the Rails console, so oh, lovely. Run the console again. Devise, create admin users. Okay, sure. I can go, as long as I can get into the console, I should be able to create new users myself. I can just go to the model that's associated with the table. Again, this is something I didn't have to do with the other section though. So the table that has been made accessible for me, admin users, should have a model called admin user that looks something like this, and it does. Admin user dot count shows 0. So is that just because well, I guess it doesn't matter why it happened, I can just fix it. So a way of fixing it will just be to create a new admin user. And so I can say something like new admin equals admin user dot new admin dot password equals password, new admin dot email equals admin@example.com. And I wonder if I have to confirm the password. Probably.
Yes. Confirmation.
Password confirmation. New admin dot save. True. Let's go back over here. And I'm in. So there we go. This is the table. ActiveAdmin has the ability to modify that table as well. So I can go into the admin user section and see the user that I just added to the system. Typically this would have already been there, and then sort of the first step for any admin dashboard is to go and create a new admin user and remove the default one, right? Because if you're ever going to deploy production, you don't want to go and deploy production and leave the default user in there, although I imagine some people do. We could probably write a little web scanner that looked for ActiveAdmin installs and tried to log in with admin@example.com with a password of password, and we'd probably find some. So first step would be to come in and create your own. So here would be like kgeski@rc.ca, super secure password. Notice it's encrypted in the database, so it's not actually stored in plain text in the database. And then it would be a matter of going back in and deleting this existing user, which will probably log me out, and I can log back in. Okay, so up top here, we don't see the customer table or customers table that we want to manage, and that's because we have to register it with ActiveAdmin. And so to register it with ActiveAdmin, the instructions tell me that I run yet another generator Rails generate ActiveAdmin resource followed by the model name. And so I can go and run that from my command prompt. And the model name is customer. After this is done, we'll see in this top menu a customers link, and there'll also be a new file in the ActiveAdmin folder called customers. So we'll wait for that to appear. So it created the ActiveAdmin customer. If I reload this, there's my customers. There currently are none, but I could go to create new customer. I'm giving the ability to add a customer by full name, phone number, email address, and notes. If I was to do so though, so just for example, oh, now everybody on the internet can call me. This is the phone number. And okay, Gusky notes, this will not work. This will not work because of the same thing that happens when you work with sort of forms and Rails in general, in that you have to whitelist the different columns that you want Rails to be able to set from a form from the outside world. So if I was to try to create this customer, it would tell me that there's forbidden attributes. I wasn't able to actually set this data correctly. This is fixed by going to that new customer file in the ActiveAdmin folder and whitelisting the parameters that I want to be accessible. So there's some comments in here that shows me how to do it. So I say permit params. There was a name that I wanted to be able to change, a phone number, an email address, and some notes. The rest of this can now go away. And now if I go back and create my customer, there it is, although it incorrectly says this will not work, so I can go and fix that. Oh, and I didn't whitelist my first name. So it's true that it didn't work. It was full name. Wally Glutton. There we go. So that worked. It saved everything. Yep.
Last time you did that on the controller.
Yes. So if I was working with scaffolded or manually created controller, I would do it there. So there's two places. If you're handling your own CRUD and you're adding columns that need to be set, then yes, the controller is where you do the whitelisting. If you're working with ActiveAdmin, because you don't have access to ActiveAdmin's controllers, they're wrapped up in the gem, then you have to go into that AppAdmin folder. So it's specific to this gem that you have to go to that folder. And I can now create another user if I wanted, just so that I have more than one in my system. Daisy. Create. So there you go. The CRUD's working. If I was to go into the model, the actual app models folder, I could now add validations to a customer. Things like validates that the full name has a presence of true. And now if I was to try to add a customer without a full name, scroll over here, new customer. create customer. Can't be blank. And you can even see there's like a little asterisk there to denote the fact that that's like a required field. And so ActiveAdmin is fairly smart about recognizing the validations that you've placed on your models and giving you appropriate prompts when you fail to validate. Okay, so that sort of covered off this setup part, right? Instead of running scaffolding, we did ActiveAdmin, but we're at a point where we have CRUD access to a customers table. Next up, you're supposed to create a partial and then a new controller. I'm just going to reverse the order of that because right now that partial, there would be no place to use it because I don't have scaffolding set up. So first I'll create a new controller, and then I will go and create a customer's partial to use within that controller. So I'll create the controller from the command prompt. And before doing so, I'll just make sure that I say something like this, git add. I should have done this probably once after generating the model and once after adding ActiveAdmin, but I'll do a sort of a batch commit. Added a customer model and ActiveAdmin as well. And push it. And now I can do a Rails generate controller. The controller I want to generate is called Finder. That will put a new file in my app controllers folder, and it'll also put a subdirectory in my app views folder called Finder. So a directory for the Finder related views. So in the controllers folder, we're going to see a Finder controller appear, and in the app views folder, we're going to see a Finder folder appear. And I'll open those up, or at least I'll open the controller up for editing, and I'll go and create a few new files inside of the folder. Okay, and I'll close down some of these tabs here because I don't need to deal with those right now. So the Finder controller is good to go. In the views, I now have this Finder, and there's going to be a few different files I need to put in here. I'm creating a few actions. I'm creating an action, an index action for the root path, missing email action, and an alphabetized action. So I'm going to need views for each one of those. So an index.html.erb and a alphabetized.html.erb, as well as a missing email.html.erb, and I'll open all of those up inside of Komodo as well. I also need to open up my routing file because I need to route to this new controller and the actions that are within it. I'll remove all the comments from the routing file. It makes it look much less daunting when it's only 5 lines long or 4 lines long. So the goal initially was to have an index action that loaded up all customers. So just going to my active record model and requesting all customers, saving it inside of a customers variable. What'll happen now is the customers variable will now be accessible from the automatically loaded view, which is the app views finder index.html.erb. So remember that our instance variables are immediately available to our associated views, and we're associated to our views by name. So the index is going to load up an index view. Now I need to wire up the routes, because the only way for an end user to be able to invoke a controller action is if they have a route to do so. That's what our routing does. It wires URLs to controller actions. And so here I'm going to say, set up a new route that responds to an HTTP GET request. Oh, I don't even need to do it for this one. This is the root route, so I just have a special helper that says root should path to the finder's index. I won't initially actually display any customers, but I will test to see if everything's wired up correctly, see if my route for my root properly runs that index action, which will in turn load up this index view, allowing me to see that. So if everything is sort of wired up correctly, when I go to the root, I should see it worked. So here's the root. And it says it worked. Okay, back to my command prompt. Git add, git commit. Added a finder controller and wired up a index action slash view slash route. Notice that there seems to be some styling that has been applied to my document. This doesn't look like the default styling of a web page without any CSS. Normally we get serif fonts for our headers if we have default styling. Here it looks like we have a sans serif font and we have like no margin sort of around that document. What's happening here is if we view source, we'll see that ActiveAdmin is sort of leaking out into the rest of our application. This is a bunch of stuff that ActiveAdmin has loaded. It's a number of JavaScript files as well as a style sheet. We don't want that to leak into the rest of our application. I'm not sure why it does by default, but I can stop it from doing so by going into my app assets folder, and I can go into the style sheets folder and I can grab that ActiveAdmin file and I can cut it and paste it into my vendor assets folder, which is where plugins are supposed to store their stuff. I imagine this is another example of something that's not quite done in version 1 of ActiveAdmin that we're tracking on GitHub, and likely when they do release version 1, it'll properly stash this stuff in the vendor assets folder. I can also go and grab in the app assets JavaScripts folder the ActiveAdmin coffee script and stash that in the vendor assets JavaScripts folder. Now when I reload my page, it looks much more like I would expect it to when there was no styling applied, and the number of files that are included in my head are a lot smaller now. ActiveAdmin itself, though, should still work with proper styling. So if I go over to the admin section and view source here, we still see all the correct stuff. Okay, so it worked, but it's still not actually displaying the customers that I want it to display. To do so, I could do a few things, right? I could go and I could loop over the customers, and while looping over them, call each one customer, and then do something like inside of a paragraph tag, I'll put their name, their full name. So I have this customers variable. I'm now making use of it by looping over each customer, temporarily calling each one customer, and accessing their full name and echoing it out to the screen. There's my two customers. That said, the whole point was that I was supposed to create a partial that would do some of this for me, and so I can go about creating that right now, because otherwise I'm going to have whatever I do here, and it'll be more than this, right? I'll probably display more than just their full name. I would have to repeat that in missing email, and I would have to repeat that in alphabetized. So before I even get started on that repetition, I might as well go into my app views folder. I'm going to create a partial. The partial is for a customer, and so I'm going to make a folder called customers where customer related stuff will go, and inside of there I'm going to put a customer partial called underscore customer.html.erb. When working on the challenge, you likely didn't have to create that folder because it would have been there already when you scaffolded up a customer. This will now be a partial for a single customer, not a collection of customers. So it'll be able to do things like this. Let's say that my customer's full name should appear inside of like an H2 maybe. For styling purposes, I might have let's say like a div with a class of customer on it. And then I might have within there things like phone number, where I echo out the customer's phone number, or email address as well. Now I have a partial called customer that internally refers to a variable called customer. That naming is purposeful. I've named the variable that I'm using inside of my partial the same thing as the partial. And what that gives me the ability to do here in the index is to simply say, maybe here I'll just say something like all customers. So I have a header on my page here. And then I would say render that customers variable, plural. And what the render command will do is it'll say, okay, you've passed to me a collection of customers. So you want me to render a number of customer objects. Is there a partial for this? And it will look in the customers folder, and it will look for a customer partial, and it will find the one that we built. And it will then render that customer partial once for every customer in this collection. And so if I go back to here, it does just that, right? There's my top header and my two customers being rendered. That is the magical way of doing things, where we're relying on all sorts of things like naming conventions and whatnot. The sort of less glamorous but more understandable way of doing this would be to say render the partial, and then we would say, well, it's the customer partial in the customers folder, so pathing to the partial specifically, render it for the collection customers, and what do we want to do now? Calling each thing, each object customer. Let's see if that does the same thing. It does. And so there we get our same collection rendered out. So this line 3 here is actually a short form for lines 5 through 7, where we're explicitly stating which partial to load and where it is. So render the partial customer in the customers folder. Use the collection customers, and for each object in that collection, create a variable called customer and make it accessible to my partial. So all 3 of those things are implicitly done when we just say render customers. I'll remove the explicit version and leave the implicit one in place. git status will show me what's changed. Sometimes sometimes I don't want to necessarily do everything all at once, right? So some of this change has to do with me moving those ActiveAdmin files around. Some of this change has me sort of creating new views and modifying views. And so I'm going to stage it separately. I'll do a git add app/views, and that should stage the view changes that I made, those right there. And I can then commit that. Created a customer partial and used it from the Finder index view. I can then stage the rest of the changes, which are all those ActiveAdmin moving those files around, and I can commit those separately. That's why committing is always a two-step process. That's why we first do the add and then we do the commit, because we don't always want to stage all of the files and commit them all together. We might like to do it in pieces like this. And so now I can do my commit message, moved the ActiveAdmin SAS and CoffeeScript files to the vendor assets folder. Push those. So it may not seem like that big of a deal, but I mean, if I was working on a large team here, it's best that when the team pulls in new changes that they see that you have made, that they actually understand what those are, and they'll understand them by reading the commit message. And you don't want to have sort of side effect changes that you may not have mentioned. So if I had sort of wrapped that all in one big commit message and maybe just talked about the new partial, it may have been not that obvious that the ActiveAdmin stuff was sort of coming along for the ride. So it's nice to just break it out into two separate commits. The other part of this challenge had us build other actions, right? One which loaded things up alphabetically. Alphabetized was to do that. And alphabetized is not going to have any arguments, and it's going to do something very similar. So this time we're now going to order by the full name. And then there was the idea of having a missing email. And this is going to load up all customers where the email address was blank. I now need to wire those up in my routing file. And this is where I would specify like a GET request to /alphabetized should then load up the Finder alphabetized action. And I'll even give it a route name so I can make a little menu. It probably generates one automatic for me, but sometimes when I don't know what Rails is going to do magically for me, I just switch over to the explicit way. So here's how I give my route an explicit name. And I also want to have a missing email path. So the first part of the route definition is the URL path, so /alphabetized or /missing email. The second part, which we use the hash rocket to point to, is which controller, hash, which action, and then I can give it a name as well. In each one of these views, we're going to render our customers. One of them is going to say missing, or customers missing emails. Customers missing email addresses. And it can render out those customers. The alphabetized one can say customers in alphabetical order by first name. And it'll be by first name because it's a full name that we're ordering on. And now I can go to missing email. I should see none at this point because I don't have any customers that are missing an email address. If I go to alphabetized, it's different from the root where Wally was first. Alphabetized is now alphabetical, so Daisy goes first. There is some repetition now, and there's also something that I noticed, which was the fact that, if there are no customers, it might be nice to say as much. So it might be nice to say something like, if customer's size is 0, no customers found, else render the customers. And so now for the missing email, it says no customer found, but for the others, it displays them. But that would lead me to think that I should probably do this in the other views, and I would start to feel a little bit like there's something going wrong here, that my code wasn't dry, right? So I'm going and I've added this here, and now I have to go add it here, and I have to go add it here. These views are basically the same, or at least should be. And the idea of doing this and pasting this into each one of them should feel smelly. Like that's a code smell, right? I have like duplicate code in 3 different places. I can avoid this though. What I can do, these are effectively the same views. So I'm just going to go to my view folder and delete them. Delete alphabetized and delete missing email. And just keep the index. And so delete those. Oh, you actually did delete, but you didn't tell me. Okay, there you are. And then what I can do here, the default behavior, right? The default behavior is to automatically load a view by name. Index gets index. But in Rails, there's always like a default way of doing things and then the more explicit way of doing things. So the explicit way of doing things here is that you're rendering the index view, right? So I don't need to do that here because the name is index and it will automatically do that for me. But I can do that here. So I can say, load up all the customers, and then instead of automatically loading up an alphabetized view, just render the index view. Same thing for missing emails. So I go back over here. This should still work. Missing emails should work. It says no customer found. It now says all customers, which is sort of problematic. And so instead of saying that, I could just replace this with a new variable called page title. And I could now set that page title from each one of these. All customers. Alphabetized customers. And customers missing email addresses. So I've just created another instance variable which will be accessible in that view, which will just be rendered in right there. Missing email tells me as much. That's just the home page. It'd be nice now to also have some links to those so I don't have to always just go and modify my location bar. But at this point, we're probably ready for another commit. Add it all, commit -m. Finish the missing email and alphabetized actions. They now use the index view. And so now I need links to them. I'll probably put those links to those individual routes inside of, let's say, for example, the overall layout. I want them on all pages, so it might be nice to have like a header at the top of my page that had like a nav in it, which was just to have a simple nav, an unordered list of links. One will say link to, and it'll link to the home page, and that'll be a link to the route path. Another will be a link to my alphabetized. And here's where the naming, this is why I gave my routes names. So this one's called alphabetized. So when I link to it, I'll link to alphabetized path. I always just take the name of the route and add underscore path to it. And for missing email, it'll be similar. I'll go and I'll have, I've named it missing email. And so from here, this would be the missing email path, and this would be the missing email link. And now at the top of all of my views, I will have an error. And I just wrote link instead of link to. Home, alphabetized, missing email. Looking good. Okay, back over here. Added a menu to the layout. Lastly, I was supposed to add a association, right? I need a collection of provinces so that each of my customers can belong to a particular province. And so this will be a matter of doing a Rails generate model for a province. And I'm just going to make a province as simple as possible. My province is simply going to have a single name string column along with its sort of Rails default stuff like the ID and the timestamps. And then I'm also going to need to add a foreign key to the customers table, because that's how a customer is going to reference a particular province. They're going to have a province ID column, which will be where the foreign key to the provinces table is going to go. And there's a handy little generator for adding foreign keys. If I go to my migrations, references. Here's an example right here, Rails generate migration. This one, they're adding a user ref to products. We're going to be adding a province ref to customers. So let me just put this example up at the top here. Rails generate migration, add province ref to customers, where a province, so references. You always want to look really carefully before running any of these commands for typos, because when Rails generates code for you, your typos will be sort of propagated throughout that code. So here, Rails generate add province ref to customers, province references, looks good. I'll now have two migrations that I can run by way of rakedb migrate. One migration that was created when I created my new model, another one that was created right now when I ran this migration generator. I will then need to register my provinces table with ActiveAdmin so that I have the ability to edit it. I'll then go into the ActiveAdmin file for a province and I'll whitelist the name so that I can actually edit the province from ActiveAdmin. And so the ActiveAdmin command for adding a resource was this. I should probably run the, probably do things in the right order. Rake db migrate should be done now, so that I actually have a provinces table before I go about registering it. Not sure if that would actually cause any problems, but it seems more logical to do it this way. As that's running, I can go and close down some of these tabs. They're all working, and I can go open up my customer and my province model, and I have to define the associations. A customer is going to belong to a province because the customer is, or at least the customer's table is where the foreign key resides. And so a customer belongs to a province, singular. And we know it's singular because this is where the foreign key is, and the foreign key can point to at most one row in the provinces table. So we belong to a singular province. And a province has many customers, and we know that that's plural, not only because of the word many, which just sort of implies that it should be plural, but the fact that if the foreign key is on the customers table, you can have any number of customers that has the same foreign key. So you could have 12 different customers that have a foreign key that points to the province of Manitoba. That's fine, right? That's how it sort of works. So a province has many customers. A customer belongs to a province. Back over here, I can now run my generator for registering my resource with ActiveAdmin, but I ran it wrong because I didn't actually mention the resource name. And so the resource name is province. And then the last step will just be to edit that ActiveAdmin generated file where I can whitelist the columns on the province that I wish to be able to edit from ActiveAdmin. And so that'll be in the app admins folder. I will get a new file in there called province.rb. And I do. And so I can now whitelist permit params name. That was the only column that I needed access to. Save that up. If I now go to my admin dashboard, we can see that there's a provinces table. I might also have a validation on a province such that it validates that the name is present. And so when I create a new province, if I try to create one without a name, it will error. I can see the little asterisk there, which is telling me that it's a required field. Manitoba will be one province that I have in my system. It has a ID of 1 in the database. I can make a second province, Ontario. And now, when I add or edit a customer, because ActiveAdmin knows about my models, it'll see my associations and it'll create for me the appropriate dropdown. So whereas in your version of the scaffolded customer resource manager, you would have had to do that yourself, ActiveAdmin just looks at your database, or no, sorry, it looks at your models for you, sees the association, and it just provides the correct dropdown for you. So it's wired up so that it can do that auto magically. So I can say, oh, this customer is in Manitoba, and I can update that. That won't stick. Why won't it stick? Because I haven't whitelisted that column, which is the province ID column. So that is here. The permitted parameters on a customer now includes the province ID. Edit that customer again. Specify my province. That customer now has a province of Manitoba. So I can say this git add git commit -m added a province model with an association to customer. And sort of the forward-facing side of my page, the non-admin view, it would be nice if the provinces were mentioned there now. And so I have a partial that I can edit, so that if I edit it in that one place, customers in all places on my site will be updated. That one place is here. So I can say, here is where I display the customer's province. Unlike the other elements that are present above, this province may or may not be set. If I just did this, I would get an error. And let's see what that error looks like, because it's the most common of Rails errors. You'll see this error time and time again. It is the undefined method for nil class nil error. And in this case, it's saying undefined method name for nil class nil. And so when you're debugging one of these nil class errors, you want to see what is nil. And so you'll know what is nil by two things. One, the line in which the error occurred is pointed out to you. So it happens somewhere in this statement here. And it's saying that the method name doesn't exist on an object of type nil. So we're calling name on province, so it's province that is the nil thing. If the error was undefined method province for nil class nil, we would know that the customer was the nil thing. But in this case, we were able to properly go from customer to province without an error. It's when we called the name on the province that generated the error. And that's because some customers don't have provinces associated with them. So for some customers, that association will be nil. And so we need to guard that with an if statement. So if customer province is present, then display it. Otherwise, just say none. I think I need there'll be a space in there already. And reload this page. Wally Glutton, no province. Daisy Glutton has a province. And I think that was the last thing that we needed to handle in the challenge. So that's the challenge implemented without scaffolding, but with ActiveAdmin. It should still work now across all of our different views. The one thing I haven't yet tested is this one. I've always just assumed that no customer found means that it actually has been working. Let's just go quickly add one customer without an email address to just ensure that that is actually working correctly. So here we'll create a new customer. From Ontario. just gets a name. And so now back over here, all customers, we see 3, alphabetized, we see 3, missing email, we see 1, and it is indeed missing the email and the phone number. Notice that we don't have to worry about when the email and the phone number are missing. Sure, it sort of looks ugly just to see the name without any data beside it, but it didn't error, right? So we didn't get a nil class error here because the customer itself is not nil. Their customer does exist. It just so happens that in the phone number and email address, there's a blank string. And so I could put a guard on that and display something else like email isn't present or phone number isn't present if I wanted to, but it doesn't cause an error. Just retrieving a column that has a blank string on a particular object, that's fine. It's just going to return that blank string, and the blank string is going to get injected into our view. It does matter here when we try to call a method or a property on something that is potentially nil. So that's sort of the difference between the two issues there. And again, I can add this and commit it. And that last thing was added the display of customer province names on the front end. And I can push that up to Git. And notice I'm already at 9 commits. So if 25 commits for the project sounded daunting to you, as long as you are sort of committing along with as you develop, I was able to hit 9 commits within just over an hour, right? So it shouldn't be too difficult to get 25 for the project. So I'll stop the screencast now.